self-audit requirement calling for information practices to be reviewed annually. Additionally, all safe harbor programs would be required to regularly submit to the FTC the results of their annual member audits and any disciplinary actions imposed by their members. Clearly, Chairman Leibowitz and the rest of the FTC deserve our thanks and our appreciation for conducting a careful, thorough, and thoughtful review of COPPA, leading to these important recommended changes. While some privacy advocates would like to raise the COPPA age threshold because of an increasing use of social networking sites by teenagers, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, I believe the FTC showed common sense restraint in taking a go-slow approach. The last thing we want to do is to inhibit technological advances and stifle growth of the Internet by moving forward in a new policy area without a good, smart game plan in place. I look forward to having this particular debate in the months ahead as we continue our broader hearings on privacy. In closing, I also want to stress the importance of parental involvement in this process. It's not enough to simply check the box and provide consent. I urge all parents everywhere to regularly check out the websites that your kids are visiting, carefully review their privacy policies. And finally, ask questions. Make sure you clearly understand a site's practices as well as its policies, and give your kids a primer on the dangers of online predators. Talk to them often and make them more self-aware. It's critically important that all of us continue to work together to keep the Internet as safe as possible for all of our children. And now the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade, is now recognized for his 5 minutes for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman of this subcommittee and all of the others who have worked so hard to make today's hearing possible. Thank you very much, because this is certainly an important subject. Also want to thank the witnesses for coming forward today, and I look forward to each of your testimonies. The privacy of our children is paramount and is an issue where we can show strong bipartisan support. Over 10 million children access the Internet on a regular basis, and it is our job as policymakers to ensure that they are protected and their personal information is safe. In 1998, consumer use of the Internet was still in its infancy. It had evolved from making up about 2% of two-way telecommunication traffic in 1990 to over 50% in the year 2000. Understanding the enormity of the Internet and the pervasive effect that it would ultimately have on our daily lives, Congress passed the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. We refer to it as COPPA. In the year 2000, the FTC COPPA rule went into effect. These days, homework often includes an online component. You would also find it difficult to find a child of a certain age who doesn't communicate with his or her peers over the Internet in a chat room or instant messaging program. But the majority of those websites children have to visit to complete schoolwork or talk to their friends require some sort of registration to use. I lost my spot. Let me try it again. But the majority of those websites have to visit to complete schoolwork or talk to their friends, require some sort of registration to use the site and service. Parents deserve to know what kind of personal information is being collected on their child and how it will be used. COPPA prohibits operators of websites and online services directed at children under the age of 13 from collecting personal information from them without first getting verified parental consent. I was curious as to why a parent would give consent to have their children's information collected by an operator, and it became clear to me that even free content on websites has a cost. Children are avid consumers and represent a large and powerful segment of the marketplace. They spend billions of dollars a year themselves and influence others to spend billions more. Advertisers see it as an enormous opportunity to promote products and services to an eager and impressionable audience. The FTC's proposed revised COPPA rule addresses a number of concerns that have resulted from the technological advancements of the past 5 years. Until recently, the term geolocation didn't mean so much to the average person. Now, anyone with a GPS-enabled phone can use certain online services to broadcast their exact location down to a couple of feet, and anyone can see their location. Geolocation, persistent identifiers, as well as photos, videos, and audio of a child have been added to the definition of personal information, giving website operators maximum latitude The COPPA rule requires that reasonable procedures are in place to protect the confidentiality, security, and integrity of personal information collected from children, while not mandating any specific procedures or technology. And to maximize protections for children, the FTC's proposed rule will require that website operators keep children's data for only as long as absolutely necessary, and that they ensure that their third-party vendors also protect children's personal data. Madam Chairman, I listened very carefully to your opening statement a moment ago, and I agree with all that you said. The proposed revised COPPA rule is stronger, and it will better protect American children from their data falling into the wrong hands. It seems to me that a lot of the rules should be incorporated into the baseline privacy legislation that protects everyone, regardless of age. Someone who is 12 today and 13 tomorrow has the same privacy concerns as someone who is 18 today and 19 tomorrow. I hope that moving forward with privacy legislation, we can look to COPPA's revised rule and apply the strong common sense privacy protection measures to all Americans. Thank you very much. I look forward to your testimony.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the chairman emeritus of the full committee, Mr. Barton, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I sincerely appreciate you holding this hearing. This is a very personal issue with me. I've been involved with privacy for a number of years and have a very special interest in children's privacy because of my 6-year-old son and my 5 grandchildren. When I grew up, Madam Chairwoman, I didn't even know what a computer was. So my son, though, my youngest son, 6-year-old son, probably spends at least an hour a day right now playing on the computer, both at school and at home. He knows better how to click on things than I do, quite frankly. As co-chairman of the Privacy Caucus, along with Congressman Ed Markey of this committee, I have served as a leading advocate for online consumer protection. He and I together have introduced H.R. 1895, the Do Not Track Kids Act of 2011. This legislation does 5 things. It updates the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act in 1998. It adds protections that children or young teenagers ages 13 to 17. It prohibits internet companies from sending targeted advertising to children and minors, prohibits internet companies from collecting personal and location information from anyone less than 13 years of age without parental consent, and anyone less than 18 without individual consent. It would require website operators to develop an eraser button to give children and minors the ability to request a deletion of their personal information that they do not wish to be available on the internet. The issue of online privacy has become a hot topic due to the rapid growth of the internet. I hope that this hearing, Madam Chairwoman, spotlights some of the issues and builds a bipartisan consensus to do something about it, such as move the Children's Kids Protection Act that I just mentioned. And thank you for your time and my time, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Mr. Olson from Texas for 1 minute.
I thank the chair for holding this important hearing as we continue our discussions about online privacy issues. As a father of a 14-year-old daughter and 11-year-old son, nothing is more important to me than keeping my kids safe. Kids today, like mine, have access to new technologies that enable them to get online instantly from almost anywhere and access and share information. Congress recognized there was a need to protect children's internet privacy and enacted the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, in 1998. As we examine the FTC's proposed changes to the COPPA rule, we need a clear understanding of all the tools currently available to parents to protect their children's privacy on the internet before we determine what changes are needed to COPPA. We cannot legislate in search of a problem. I thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to the hearing. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and now we'll recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 1998, thanks to the leadership of Representative Ed Markey and Dr. Catherine Montgomery, Congress passed and President Clinton signed the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And today we're fortunate to have Dr. Montgomery back before the committee to talk about this landmark law and her recommendations for the future. I'm pleased that 11 years after enactment, her overall assessment is that COPPA is a, quote, clear legislative success. COPPA has withstood the test of time, which is remarkable because innovation occurs at warp speed online. One reason for its success is that it was written to be flexible. The law gives the Federal Trade Commission the authority and the discretion to carry out several broad mandates aimed at protecting young children from the unfair collection and use of their information. The last several years in particular have been a period of rapid change in the delivery of online services. Young children now have access to social networks, interactive gaming, and apps on mobile devices that they carry with them everywhere they go. The FTC is responding to these developments by using its authority to update the COPPA rule so that the law remains an effective tool for protecting children's privacy and safety. The updates to the COPPA rule proposed by the FTC are appropriate, reasonable, well thought out, and true to the intent of the law. These changes will ensure that parents of young children remain in control of their information, whether it be their precise location at any given time, their photographic images, or a record of their online habits and activities. That is consistent with the goal of the law, that parents, not businesses, get to decide what information about their children can and should be revealed online. While the focus of this hearing is children's privacy, we must not forget that adults need privacy protections too. People of all ages need more control over their information and better privacy protection. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, we should enact comprehensive privacy legislation. Next week's privacy hearing will be our fourth this year. There were 6 privacy hearings in the last Congress. Each hearing has made me more and more convinced that current law does not ensure proper privacy protections for consumer information. As we consider comprehensive legislation, there are some clear lessons to be drawn from the 11 years of privacy protection for young children under COPPA. First, it is possible to provide consumers with real enforceable online privacy protections without killing innovation on the internet. And second, it is possible to craft legislation in such a way that the direction from Congress is precise and clear, but the authority of the agency is flexible enough to adapt changes in technology and changes in social expectations and behavior. Those are valuable lessons. I hope they will be remembered when hopefully comprehensive privacy legislation is considered by this committee. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I look forward to our continued work together on privacy. And now I'd like to turn our attention to the panel. We have just one panel of witnesses today joining us. Each of our witnesses has, as usual, prepared an opening statement that will be placed into the record. Each of you will have 5 minutes to summarize the statement in your remarks. On our panel, we have Mary Colbell-Engel, Associate Director, Division of Advertising Practices at the Federal Trade Commission. Also testifying is Himanshu Nigam, Founder and Chief Executive Office of SSP Blue. Next is Morgan Reed, Executive Director, Association for Competitive Technology. Our fourth witness is Stephen Balcom, Chief Executive Officer of the Family Online Safety Institute. Our fifth witness is Dr. Catherine Montgomery, Director of the PhD program at the School of Communication at the American University. And our final witness is Alan Simpson with Common Sense Media. Good morning, and thank you all very much for coming. You'll each be recognized for the 5 minutes. To help you keep track of time, there are the lights in front of you. As is standard, you know what yellow, green, and red each mean. As it turns yellow, either hit the gas or slam on the brakes. You get to decide. And please just make sure you turn on your microphone before you begin. And Ms. Engel, you may start for your 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mary Engel, and I'm the Associate Director for Advertising Practices in the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Commission's enforcement and administration of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA, rule. Congress enacted COPPA in 1998 to address the unique privacy and safety risks created when young children under the age of 13 access the Internet. The goals of the Act were to limit the online collection of personal information from children without their parents' permission, to protect children's safety when they view and post information online, and to maintain the confidentiality and security of personal information that's collected from children. The Commission believes that COPPA has largely worked well to fulfill these purposes, and that even as online practices evolve, the law remains important today. The Commission has brought 17 actions to enforce COPPA since the COPPA rule went into effect, garnering more than $6.2 million in civil penalties. Our cases, which have been against both large established operators and smaller or newer companies, often illustrate different core provisions of COPPA. For example, as social networking websites exploded onto the youth scene about 5 years ago, the Commission sought to ensure that these sites understood their COPPA obligations. In 2006, the Commission obtained a then record civil penalty of $1 million against Zanga.com, a popular social networking site that allegedly improperly registered 1.7 million child users without first obtaining their parents' permission. Since then, the Commission has brought a steady stream of cases against operators such as Sony BMG Music Entertainment, Iconics Brand Group, and Playdom Incorporated, each of whom sought to engage child users in the Web 2.0 world. The Commission's $3 million civil penalty against Playdom set a new record for COPPA cases. More recently, in the first COPPA case involving mobile applications, the Commission charged mobile app developer W3 Innovations with violating COPPA by collecting and maintaining personal information from thousands of children and allowing them to publicly post personal information on in-app message boards for their dress-up and girl world games. This case, which included a $50,000 civil penalty, made clear that COPPA reaches mobile online services and not just traditional online services and websites. Although law enforcement is a critical part of the Commission's COPPA program, enforcement alone cannot accomplish all of the agency's goals. The Commission also works to educate businesses and consumers about their rights and responsibilities under the law. The agency devotes significant resources to assisting website operators with rule compliance, regularly updating business education materials, and responding to inquiries from operators and their counsel. The Commission's consumer education materials, including our online safety portal, onguardonline.gov, inform parents and children about the rules protections and also provide them with general online privacy and safety information. To help ensure that COPPA continues to work well, especially in the face of an explosion of children's mobile devices and interactive online services, the Commission initiated a review of the COPPA rule last year. Drawing from the expertise the agency has gained in enforcing and administering COPPA over the years, and after extensive consideration of public input, last month the Commission proposed modifications to certain areas of the COPPA rule. While the Commission's testimony goes into these changes in greater detail, among the proposed changes are updating the rule's definition of personal information to include geolocation information and the use of persistent identifiers to direct online behavioral advertising to children, improvements to the notices that operators must use to inform parents of the operator's information collection practices, the addition of a number of permissible methods operators may use to obtain parental consent, strengthening the rule's data security protections, and shoring up agency oversight of the COPPA Safe Harbor programs. The proposed changes are consistent with the original mandates in the COPPA statute. The Commission will take public comments on these proposals until November 28th. The Commission takes seriously the challenge to ensure that COPPA continues to meet its originally stated goals, even as children's interactive media use moves at warp speed. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the Commission's COPPA program, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Engel. Mr. Nigam, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide insight on best ways to protect children's privacy in an electronic world. I've been at the forefront of nearly every major aspect of online and offline child safety for the past 20 years. Today, I'm the founder and CEO of SSP Blue, a safety, security, and privacy strategic business consulting firm. My company provides strategic guidance that promotes the protection of consumers, especially children, encourages corporate social responsibility, and develops partnerships with law enforcement, government, and NGOs. Past and current clients have included News Corporation, Microsoft, AT&T, Tagged, Formspring, and others. To be clear, I do not speak on behalf of any of our existing clients today. Prior to SSP Blue, I served in leadership roles at News Corporation, MySpace, Microsoft, and MPAA from the time the internet was just a baby to the time that social media was barely a toddler. And in each endeavor, I provide a strategic direction that put children's safety, security, and privacy at the forefront of the business. I've also served as a federal prosecutor against internet crimes against children and computer crimes at the Justice Department, an advisor to the COPA Commission, and advisor to the White House Committee on Cyberstalking, and as a prosecutor against child molestation and sex crimes in the LA County District Attorney's Office. And so I speak to you from various perspectives in government, in law enforcement, in private industry, and as a father of 4 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. The FTC has engaged in a meticulous and thoughtful process in the review of the Child Online Privacy Protection Act and should be congratulated. I also want to stress a concept that's easily forgotten. The industry has an incentive to do the right thing when it comes to protecting children's privacy rights. Businesses lose when they violate a child's privacy rights. Their brand reputation suffers, their consumer loyalty drops, their friends in child advocacy groups disappear, and most important, they lose the trust of the parents and guardians who care for the very children that they cater to. In essence, without doing the right thing, an online business cannot succeed. Within this context, I'd like to propose this subcommittee a framework on how we should approach whether and what changes are needed in COPPA. Whenever we think of protecting children, whether it is for their safety, security, or privacy, our first inclination is to protect them from anything that sounds bad instead of what is bad. Solutions based on things that sound bad eventually will fail. In the past 10 years, I've had the honor of advising the COPA Commission, sitting on the Berkman Center for Internet Safety Technical Task Force, and co-chairing the Federal Online Safety Working Group. In each of these endeavors, we could have responded to problems that sounded bad, and instead we spent the time finding the actual problems and then proposing the necessary solutions. While technologies have evolved since the advent of COPPA, I urge you to consider whether an actual problem has been clearly articulated that needs to be solved when looking at each individual change that's being proposed. Next, consider whether existing regulations can be used to respond to an identified problem. Looking back on the FTC's COPPA enforcement actions, it's clear that current regulations and rules have been quite useful and effective. In fact, a great majority of the industry does a tremendous job in working within the rules, whether they're products directed at children under 13 or 13 and over. Even now, even new companies know what is expected of them before they enter the marketplace. Interestingly, companies are finding it easier to provide services for the 13 plus as a much better business model. And so we must ask whether today there are other bad actors the FTC finds it cannot enforce against. Has the evolving landscape created gaps? In areas where existing regulations are needed, we should then determine the best solution. Several factors should be considered. We must ask, would the proposed change actually close an identified gap? 2, would it create technical implementation challenges? 3, would it lead to conflicts with other agency department demands or expectations, such as conflict that arises between data retention, data minimization, and data preservation? And 4, would it lead to unintended consequences, such as creating disincentives to providing a rich online experience for the under 13? If we utilize this framework when considering the changes, I think we'll be able to protect children's online privacy by implementing solutions that work while the technology evolves. And in closing, I want to stress that if we're to accept the proposed changes in whole, we can expect an immediate impact on the marketplace. Larger companies will adjust where they can and simply shut down areas where there's too much uncertainty. And smaller and newer companies will find investors spooked by uncertainties. Such a multi-year cycle can be avoided if you spend the time now to examine the proposal within the framework that we're outlining and identify actual problems, create effective solutions that can be readily implemented by those already incentivized to do the right thing. Thank you, Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and members of the subcommittee for giving me this opportunity to address you on this important topic.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reed, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bono Mack, Congressman Butterfield, thank you for holding this important hearing on children's privacy, FTC, and COPPA regulations. My name is Morgan Reed, and I'm with the Association for Competitive Technology, and we represent the mobile apps developers. With more than 3,000 members spread throughout the United States and the world, our folks are focused on doing all those cool apps you see on television. So during the past year, ACT has had a chance to reach out to our developers and other developer organizations throughout America to discuss privacy and the importance of privacy by design. At a recent conference, I was scheduled to present on privacy, but before I spoke, developers were given an opportunity to talk about their business. Everyone got up and said this is what they were excited about, this is the direction their business was going. And as I heard all these folks talk, I noticed that the end of their conversation always concluded with 2 words. And these 2 words are 2 words we don't hear much in the United States right now. And they're words that I think are absolutely critical to all of our discussions going forward. Those 2 words, we're hiring. And the good news is this wasn't just some random event that I was at where it was a special enclave of jobs that no one knows about. A recent study out of the University of Maryland shows that Facebook apps alone have created 200,000 jobs. Our own internal studies show that 600,000 jobs have been created, saved, or supplemented from the mobile apps economy. And the good other part of this news is that, with all deference to Chairman Bono Mac's great state of California, 88% are small businesses and over 70% are not in the great state of California. So it's widespread, it's small, and it's growing. Now, besides creating jobs, developers as a community are passionate about one other thing, and that's privacy. And education apps are particularly focused on privacy because the vast majority of mobile apps are built by parents. These aren't folks who started their company looking to get rich. They were looking to provide an interactive family experience for their kids on this device that they brought home from work. So they want to do good, and that's why we're working with organizations like privacychoice.org to build privacy policy generators so that they can easily become aware of and comply with privacy regulations. But before we all get into the specifics about Section 312.4 of the NPRM or what the meaning of collect is, I thought I would take some time to discuss the kinds of apps these small developers are creating. For example, from your district, we have animal apps. And animal pronunciations from Palm Springs. For Congressman Butterfield's district, we've got We Pray, Pray With Me, which is a special app for the iPad that allows grandparents to record a prayer for their child so that if they're away, if they're out of state, if they can't see them, the child can hear their voice. It's also used by parents that are deployed overseas and folks who are just on business trips. What a great app. We've got, from Congressman Waxman's district, we've got 3 Trees, which helps educate kids about water, sun, and air, and the 3 elements that power the world. From Congressman Lance's district, we've got Random Acts of Kindness, which helps kids know about 300 different random acts of kindness they can do, charities they can donate to, and inspiration for goodwill. From Utah, we have TapFuse. They've got 2 great apps, one that helps kids with the alphabet, another that they're doing right now that's about anti-bullying. Congressman Harper, Mississippi State currently offers a field studies in iPhone entrepreneurship at Mississippi State. And right now you've got one guy out of there who's still a freshman. His app has already sold 20,000 copies, and it's an educational app for kids in school. Congressman Guthrie, we've got Oinkosaurus, which is a great app. It's a piggy bank that helps kids learn about the stock market and how they can save money. Congressman Olson, we've got Music Master, high-tech flashcards for practicing reading music. In Maryland, we've got Pickpocket Books, which was a company built by a woman, literally a stay-at-home mom on her couch, who watched her child using the iPad and said, you know, I'd like to combine this technology with my child's love of reading. Since then, she has built a micro-empire of more than 80 books on the iPad store that she's hired voice actors, artists, and developers who've created interactive applications that allow children to listen to the book, have the book read to them, and read back and practice. Now, my own daughter, who is now 5 3/4, she reminds me, likes math apps from Montessorium, from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a great app that combines the tactile Montessori method of teaching with the touchpad on an iPad screen. Now, I know that some here will talk about those in the tech industry or media in a way that implies the larger faceless corporation. I loved the FTC's testimony earlier, but she said, we speak with the companies and their counsel. The vast majority of companies that I've named have no in-house counsel right now, and so for them, this is a learning process. And I want you to remember that the incredible innovation happening today is not driven by faceless corporations, but by thousands of moms and dads working to build applications that educate, motivate, and enrich their families. So let's make sure that we don't mess up this as we work to achieve a better online privacy protection. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. And just a side note, I appreciate the reference to California and the earthquake damage, though, up there on the wall is not my fault.
You're bringing good apps, just not earthquakes.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Mr. Balcom, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Ranking Member Butterfield and members of the subcommittee. My name is Stephen Balcom, and I'm the CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. It gives me great pleasure to testify before you today at today's hearing. We would like to applaud the Chairman's leadership on these issues. The series of hearings held by the subcommittee are a prime example of an effective step that the government can take to balance the promotion of technological innovation with the need to keep children safe online. FOSI is an international nonprofit membership organization working to make the online world a safer and healthier place for kids and their families. And we do this by identifying and promoting the best practice, tools, and methods in the field of online safety and privacy that also respect free speech. Personally, I've had over 16 years' experience working in the internet safety field, and I'm the proud father of 2 daughters. The views expressed in both my written and oral testimony are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of all the FOSI members. So the online landscape for all users has certainly changed in the past 11 years since COPPA was enacted, none more so than for children. We need a more sophisticated approach that empowers families to gain and maintain control of their digital lives. Simply put, in order to encourage safe and responsible online use, we need tools, rules, and schools. The technology tools of filters and monitoring devices, balanced laws, terms of use, and household rules, and education on good digital citizenship, online safety, privacy, and security. At FOSI, we believe in building a culture of responsibility to ensure that children have a safe and productive time on the internet. We support balanced government oversight of industry self-regulatory efforts. This approach allows for maximum innovation and creative solutions, as well as the potential for enforcement actions and legislative intervention in the event of industry non-compliance. Parental empowerment is an important component of this approach. Recent research commissioned by us and carried out by the Hart Research showed that 93% of parents have set rules or limits to monitor their children's online usage, and 53% of parents have used parental controls. FOSI is working with industry to promote increased awareness of parental controls and education as to their use. We commend Congress and the FTC for their work in providing reasonable government oversight through COPPA and its corresponding rule, while encouraging self-regulation and promoting parental empowerment and children's responsibility. The FTC has continued to evaluate the effectiveness of the rule and propose revisions where necessary. The planned revisions contain many positive aspects and ideas relating to the definition of a child, the actual knowledge standard, the expansion of parental consent requirements and methods, as well as proposed revisions to the safe harbor regime. We agree fully with the FTC's analysis that the current rule is broad enough to encompass the technological advancements that have occurred in the past 11 years. The COPPA statute defines child as an individual under the age of 13, and we are pleased that the FTC has determined that it remains the appropriate age. Changes to the statutory definition could lead to a substantial increase in children lying about their age, or for that matter, parents lying about their kids' age, and thus negate protections afforded to younger kids through COPPA and specific website protections for minors. The FTC's enforcement mechanism foreseen in the original rule has provided a flexible and valuable tool that has allowed the FTC to adapt to the changing technologies. Recent enforcement actions, which we just heard about against W3 Innovations, an app developer, show that the FTC was able to use the rule to ensure the compliance of a technology that was not widely available when COPPA was enacted. The FTC's review of the rule in conjunction with their recent enforcement actions demonstrates that no further action on the part of Congress is required at this time. The current system with the FTC's proposed revisions allows for privacy protection as well as technological innovations. Furthermore, attempts by Congress to pass legislation will almost certainly be rendered inadequate within a few years by the innovation of new methods of online interaction, sharing, and communication. In my opinion, a positive step that Congress could take in this sphere would be to increase funding for internet safety and privacy education in schools, as well as for research into children's online behaviors and attitudes. This would allow for all future legislative efforts to be founded on a factual basis. Finally, I believe that the best way to ensure that children have productive, safe, and secure experiences on the Internet is through awareness, education, and empowerment. I would like to thank the subcommittee again for holding this timely and important hearing. We believe that with reasonable government oversight, the self-regulatory and multi-stakeholder approach currently being championed in the United States, although under attack in other parts of the world, can continue to protect kids and their privacy on the Internet without impeding technological innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Montgomery, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bono Mack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and the other members of the subcommittee. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about children's privacy. It was during the 1990s, in the mid-1990s, that I started investigating what was going on with online children's websites, and I was very disturbed to find that because of the increasing value of children as a target market and their avid involvement with the Internet, companies were setting up websites all over the web that had a business model really based on taking a lot of personal information from children and offering prizes and doing all kinds of things in order to get children to give up personal information. One of my favorites was the Batman site that said, "Be a good citizen of Gotham and fill out the census." And there were many, many others like that. And I did not hear, when I went to industry meetings and when I read all the excited coverage about all this, any mention of children's privacy, any concerns raised in the industry, and that's why we went to the FTC. I was pleased that I was able to work with both sides of the aisle in Congress, with the FTC, with a coalition of child health and consumer groups, and with industry stakeholders to craft a statute and a set of regulations that would successfully balance our collective interests in nurturing the growth of commerce on the Internet while protecting the privacy of our children. And because decades of research had already identified that younger children had particular vulnerabilities to advertising, one of the key goals of the law was to prevent online companies from targeting individual children with marketing messages. COPPA has served, as many people have observed here, as an effective safeguard for young consumers under the age of 13. And it sent a strong signal to the industry: if you're going to do business with our nation's children, you will have to follow some rules, and that was built into the system. As a result, some of the most egregious data collection practices that would have become state-of-the-art were curtailed. Today, however, children are growing up in a ubiquitous 24/7 digital media environment. The data collection practices that we identified in the 90s have been eclipsed by a new generation of tracking and targeting techniques. The Commission's proposed rules for updating COPPA offer a careful, well-researched, and sensible set of recommendations for addressing many of these practices, and I want to briefly highlight 3 of them. The first, which others have mentioned, is mobile and other location devices. Roughly half of all children have mobile phones now by the age of 11. You can ask any parent. Advertising is growing on mobile technologies. Geolocation makes it possible to target kids wherever they are. This raises not only marketing abuse issues and privacy issues, but also safety issues. I think the agency has appropriately clarified that COPPA should apply to mobile and other web-connected location devices. The second issue concerns this notion of what's personally identifiable information. I was a participant in the 2010 June roundtable at the FTC. I was quite taken with the amount of consensus among a wide spectrum of participants, that these days there's really no longer a meaningful distinction between personal information and such, quote, non-personal information as persistent cookies and IP addresses. And we know, the Wall Street Journal did an investigation last year showing that a lot of these things are being placed routinely on children's sites. While the FTC's proposed rules would then apply COPPA safeguards to protect children from companies that want to use the tools to behaviorally target individual children or to create profiles or share the information, The rules are also narrowly tailored so that they wouldn't interfere with what the companies are doing in terms of their regular, normal business operations. And I think this kind of sensitivity is reflective of how the FTC has done a good job here. By the way, on the mobile phones, though, I'm disappointed about text messaging. I hope we can talk about that because we know how much kids are using text. Finally, I agree with the Commission that the mechanism of parental verification that we created with COPPA is not appropriate for teens. However, I do feel strongly that adolescents can no longer be ignored in the public policy debates over online privacy. We know they're being encouraged to share a lot of information. They also do not know how all of their data are tracked by all of these other kinds of technologies that are now online. I hope the FTC will develop some specific recommendations in its broader privacy agenda. And the goal of any public policy on teen privacy should be to balance the ability of young people to participate fully in the digital media culture with the government and industry's obligation to ensure that youth are not subjected to unfair, deceptive surveillance, data collection, or behavioral profiling. The legislation offered by Representative Joe Spartan and Representative Ed Markey, known as the Do Not Track Kids Act of 2011, is based on these principles, and it's to give teens themselves the power to make their own decisions about their privacy online. If we can build privacy principles into how our online businesses engage with both children and adolescents, we can help ensure that young people are treated fairly in the digital marketplace and that they grow up with an understanding of their rights and responsibilities as consumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Ms. Bonomack, Ranking Member Butterfield, and thank you to all the members of the subcommittee for this important hearing. I'm Alan Simpson. I'm with Common Sense Media, and I want to begin by outlining that Common Sense Media works as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to helping children and families thrive in a world of media and technology. One way that we describe our work is that we love media. We work with everyone to make it better for kids. We admire and embrace many of the innovations we've seen in this space in recent years, and we believe that parents, educators, companies, and policymakers all must play a central role in helping to protect children's privacy in this rapidly changing electronic world. And we work with each of these groups to improve the media lives and the privacy opportunities of children. The Federal Trade Commission's proposed rule revisions will help keep COPPA up to date with this rapidly changing world. They will improve protections for children's online privacy, encourage parental involvement, and foster innovation in online services for children, especially the innovations we most need, innovations to protect children. The COPPA recommendations will help hold industry more accountable. They will build, and most importantly, they will build on the fundamental purpose of COPPA, which is bolstering the role of parents as the informed gatekeepers in the lives of their young children. This is not a question of whether kids will be online or offline. We all know that kids are online and they will always be online. It is most a question of who will be watching them and who will be watching over them when they are online. I'd like to echo Dr. Montgomery's remarks about the value of the FTC recommendations and emphasize most of all that the FTC has struck a careful and reasonable balance between maintaining the internal operations of online services and protecting children from intensive tracking and behavioral advertising. The FTC proposals will be important steps for younger kids, but teens still need protections and they need empowerment. And the legislation Mr. Barton mentioned, H.R. 1895, will be a strong baseline for those protections and that empowerment. In my written remarks, I've outlined in more detail the work that Common Sense Media is doing with parents and schools, including dozens of articles that we've published in the last year and a half around privacy and security. Many of those parent tips that we published are among the most popular resources on our site for parents. We also work in more than 18,000 schools around the country providing the education around smart, responsible use of media, and privacy and security are an essential part of that. But one of the most important parts of this equation are the media and technology companies themselves, and we feel they must do far more to help parents and families protect children's online privacy, in part because they are in the best position to develop better technology, better tools, and better information for users. There have been positive steps in this area of late, but on the whole, media and technology companies have not done enough to provide better solutions for families. Parents need the innovators to innovate to protect. In our experience, the companies will, especially if they are encouraged by this subcommittee and this Congress to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. And I will recognize myself then for the first 5 minutes of questions. And again, I thank you all very much for your testimony. And I would ask Ms. Engel, Can you elaborate on why the Commission opted not to seek a change on the age threshold?
Yes, that was an issue that we considered very carefully, and we thought that Congress, when it enacted the statute, it also thought about that at the time, and believed that it reached the right result, that under 13 is the right cutoff. While any particular age cutoff is going to be somewhat arbitrary, and children do develop at different rates, the whole idea behind and the way that COPPA works is for the child to provide their parent's email address in order that the operator may contact the parent to get permission to further interact with the child. And the concern is that if you raise the age, COPPA may not work well because older children may not provide the parent's email address. They may provide their own or their friends or a sibling's. And that's true even more now than it was earlier, because it's very common now for children to have their own email addresses or multiple email addresses. Or they may simply lie about their age, and younger kids can do that as well, but it's less likely. And finally, we had some concerns about the constitutional rights that courts have afforded to teenagers, and whether that might be unduly intrusive on the teenagers.
Thank you. And you mentioned the Email Plus rule. So the COPPA rule allowed website operators to use the low-cost Email Plus approach in determining whether there has been verifiable parental consent. And this was intended to be a short-term option, available only until the Commission determined that more reliable consent methods had adequately been developed. Has the Commission now made such a determination, and do sufficient substitutes for Email Plus currently exist? And if you disallow that mechanism immediately, does that leave businesses in a lurch?
So the Commission, when it crafted the COPPA rule, decided to make a distinction between personal information collected for a site's internal use and information that's used publicly. That distinction is not in the statute itself, but the Commission decided that it made sense on a temporary basis to make that distinction and allow a less reliable method of obtaining consent called Email Plus, assuming that more reliable methods, new technology would develop. That turned out not to be the case. The Commission extended allowing that unreliable method a couple of times, and then ultimately made it go on indefinitely when no new technologies developed. But having reconsidered it over the years, we believe that the COPPA statute didn't make that distinction between internal and external uses, and that perhaps this unreliable but easy method has actually deterred the development of technologies that would allow a more reliable method. So in its place, we're proposing that companies can apply to the Commission for a new method. We would place it on the public record, get comment, and that would allow the Commission the opportunity to really evaluate the method and determine whether it's reliable, and then essentially include it in the rule. It's true right now that the list of reliable methods is not exclusive. Companies can use any method that is reasonably designed to ensure that the person providing consent is the child's parent. But what we heard is that companies prefer the assurance that this is the method that essentially the Commission has blessed. They want it listed. They don't want to take the risk that the Commission may find it inadequate. So we've proposed this new method to help provide that assurance.
Thank you. That's understandable. And the FTC proposes to add factors to its totality review of websites to determine if they are targeted to children under 13. For instance, music and celebrities that would appeal to children. But many celebrities and a lot of music content appeal to both 8-year-old, 13-year-olds, and 49-year-olds. Would that blur the age line and create confusion for websites as to whether or not they would be considered a COPPA operator?
No, I think that we're still maintaining the same test. Basically, it is a totality of the circumstances. You look at a number of factors to determine whether a particular site is directed to kids under 13. And by adding more factors, we're not changing the test. We're just making it clear that these are factors that one can consider. And yes, it's true that it's never, it'll never be a bright line cutoff that no children under 13 will be interested in an over 13 site and vice versa. But by adding more factors, we're trying to make it more transparent to operators the kinds of factors the Commission considers.
Thank you, and right on time. The chair will recognize Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you. There is a published study titled Always Connected, The New Digital Media Habits of Young Children. I believe Dr. Montgomery has referred to it from time to time. This study, published through the Sesame Workshop, contains some interesting findings about the digital media usage habits of white, Hispanic, and African American children. In particular, while the study points out that the digital divide remains, when children of color do have access to digital media, they tend to use it substantially more than white children. African American children between ages 5 and 9, the report says, spends 41 minutes online per session. White children in that group spend 27 minutes online per session. Hispanic children between the ages of 8 and 14 spend almost 2 hours online each day. That's 40 minutes more than white children. The study also points out that children from low-income and ethnic minority homes are less likely to have adult guidance when accessing the Internet. As a result, they are spending more time on lower-quality websites or on activities that won't help them develop school-based skills. And so, Dr. Montgomery, I would like to hear any thoughts that you might have, whether COPPA, parental notice, and consent models work well for all children, or if there are any changes that could and should be made to account for the differences that I've referenced.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I am concerned about ethnic children. As you point out, they
Excuse me, doctor, will you just check your microphone to make sure it's on and close to your mouth?
Is it on?
Maybe you
Can
pull
you hear
it
me?
closer.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm actually looking at a lot of those issues in another context. I'm doing a project on food marketing, and we're very concerned that there are very aggressive techniques that are being used to target particularly ethnic children who are at greater risk for obesity as well. So this is a very complicated problem. I think it's probably difficult to enact a law that can address those specific needs around privacy. What we want to do is to have a set of rules that work as best as they can for all children, with special sensitivities to children who are at risk. And I think that the proposed changes in the guidelines will do that, but it's going to be very important that companies take these obligations very, very seriously. And particularly, I think companies that are targeting that age group ought to be encouraged to develop their own self-regulatory mechanisms to work more effectively to ensure children's privacy.
But you do agree this is an issue that we need to be concerned about and address.
Yes, it is. And Spanish
as best we can legislatively.
And not only that, Spanish language needs to be looked at. I think that the Congress could do more to look into these things. We haven't had enough examination of these areas either.
Ms. Engel, has the Commission looked at this issue in any respect?
The Commission has not received specific data on I mean, we do have information on the greater use of Internet technologies and mobile technologies, certainly by ethnic minorities, for example. Whether there are additional protections are needed that come from that, we haven't received information on that.
Do you agree with Dr. Montgomery that it might be a little difficult to develop some type of regulatory protections to protect against these? That ideally it's a problem, but developing protections might be challenging?
Yes, I agree with that.
All right. Can you help us out, Mr. Simpson, with this, please? Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yes, sure.
Because I do think in one area that we might want to think about changing some things, because if we look at the kinds of data that are collected, when racial data are collected and children are then marketed to based on the kind of profiling that can take place with that data, that I think can be very problematic and can be very discriminatory, and I think that needs to be investigated.
All right. Mr. Simpson?
The only thing I can really add, sir, is that one of the concerns we see in the broader space around privacy and other concerns that parents have around digital media is it is, as the FCC's studies have shown, one of the reasons for lack of adoption of broadband and digital media. We all see great benefits for families and communities in broadband and what it can bring to their communities. But if they are reluctant because of what they see as the downsides, and lack of privacy and security is certainly one of them, especially in rural areas and among low-income communities.
Let me give my last 5 seconds to Mr. Reed. Yes.
Well, I want to be the guy with good news here. I'm sure that you've seen studies from Dana Boyd, and more importantly, we've worked with Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee at the Joint Center. And it turns out that mobile applications and the mobile environment is something that actually is having an impact in low-income and especially minority communities. And I think as we talk about privacy and what the government can do to shut down things and be careful about it, I think it's really important that we allow some opportunity for these things to flourish. Remember, mobile apps have only been in existence since 2008. And what we've seen from Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee's information and Dana Boyd is there's a huge opportunity for us to reach people who've never had a PC in their home through their mobile phone, but more importantly, their mobile smartphone. So I think as you talk about what the government can do and the ways it can play a role, we need to make sure that the choices are there for them to have cool things to do, rather than just tell them how they can't do things.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will recognize Mr. Barton for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to ask my first question to the representative of the Federal Trade Commission. If you don't expand the protections of the law to 13 to 17-year-olds explicitly, how do we protect them? Because they're not adults, and while they are able to make some decisions on their own, I don't know that they are fully capable of making some of the decisions that would be required in this area.
The Commission is considering the privacy interests of teens in its broader review of privacy generally. And it's certainly we've considered that some of the ideas that we've offered in that area, for example, very clear notice about the kinds of information that's being collected and how it's being used, made at the point that the information is collected, as well as data security, would also provide benefits to teens. But the Commission at this time hasn't reached any conclusions as to what additional privacy protections teens may need.
So would it be safe to say that the provision in the Barton-Markey bill that gives these protections explicitly to 13 to 17-year-olds, the FTC is not automatically opposed to, you're just not totally supportive of? Is that a fair statement?
The Commission hasn't taken a position on the legislation yet, but I think it's something I would say we're definitely not automatically opposed to it, and we'll be happy to work with you on it.
And in a similar vein, in the bill that Mr. Markey and I have introduced, we explicitly cover mobile applications. The proposed enhancements that you testified to in an existing law do not explicitly cover mobile applications. Are you opposed to the provision in the Barton-Markey bill that makes that explicit, or you just need to study that more also?
No, we're not opposed. In fact, we believe COPPA already does cover mobile applications. We interpret them to be online services already covered by the rule. And in fact, we recently brought a case against a company that was a mobile app provider on that basis.
See, my position is that more and more of our teenagers, and certainly even, sadly, children, are getting iPhones and iPads, and you almost have to explicitly cover mobile applications just because that's where the younger generation's going. So, they're not going to be sitting behind a computer. They're going to be walking around and doing stuff as they're out and about. I want to ask Mr. Is it Balcom? Is that correct? Your institute has got a great sounding name. Who funds that? Who funds your institute?
We have more than 24 members, mostly from industry, so from AOL at one end of the alphabet to Yahoo at the other.
So they would, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they would be industries that try to make a profit, which again is a good thing, by using the internet, and they would tend to want to collect information about people on the internet. Is that not a fair statement?
I think that's a very fair statement, and I also agree with my colleague Himanshu Nigam's point that it would be against their very own interest to as it were, violate kids' privacy in so doing, because it would actually rebound against them.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that your institute doesn't support the bill that Mr. Markey and I have introduced. Is that correct?
That's correct. I particularly took notice of the eraser button idea, and particularly Congressman Markey's own statements at an internet privacy hearing in July, when, as he was talking about kids posting stuff, particularly teens, I'll quote him, "What were they thinking? It will want to be the parents who will want to erase it. They have a right to do so." I'm not talking about Big Brother. I'm talking about Big Mother and Big Father. And so, given that, while proponents of the bill talk about giving kids and teenagers more control over their privacy, what we see, and particularly, let's think about a 17-year-old who's already
I want to ask you
college.
one more question. I'm not going to cut you off, but I've only got 20 seconds.
We have serious concerns about parents taking things off the internet of their 17-year-olds, and it's not as simple as rubbing out like a piece of.
We can work on that. I want to get consensus on one thing. I think that your group can agree with me on. Do you oppose the use of super cookies? Your group?
We think that it's something that deserves a considerable amount of attention, and we're looking forward to the future hearings on that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, for those of you that don't know, a super cookie is something that you is put on your IP address without your permission, and you cannot delete it. You don't know about it. It can collect information. It can even collect information on where you go on other sites, and you don't know anything about it, and it can't be deleted. And I hope at some point, Madam Chairwoman, that we'll all agree legislatively to ban super cookies. And with that, I would yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes Mr. Towns for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Simpson, in your testimony, you emphasized companies can play a more active role in protecting privacy and personal information. In what ways can companies play a more active role in protecting our privacy?
Thank you, sir. I think most importantly, and I would recognize there are quite a few companies that are doing a better job of providing information, but I think the most important change that companies need to make in this space, companies large and small, is better opportunities on their own platforms, on mobile apps, in all the devices that they provide, so that parents, in the case of younger children, and teens themselves, have more chance to understand what's going on, what data is being collected, how they can opt out of it, whether they should or shouldn't opt into it, and to keep that information simple, accessible, and actionable. The big challenge in this space right now is that it's very hard to find out what's going on with my data when I use a given device or platform. The easier they can make that, the more we have parents who can make informed choices on behalf of young kids and teens who can make informed choices on behalf of themselves.
Right. Thank you very much. Mr. Balkin, Family Online Safety Institute is your operation, right? Mm-hmm. Right, good. What do you think the FTC did right in their proposed rule, and what do you think is missing?
Well, I think they, as I said in my own testimony, I think they got the balance just right between protection on the one hand while not squashing innovation on the other. I don't think that there was anything that they left out. I mean, it was quite a thorough review, and we're very impressed with the range in their technical know-how about emerging technologies. So we're pretty happy with it.
What about the definition of a child age definition?
We think that's appropriate. We certainly did not advocate for it to be increased. As I was beginning to explain in my last response, we have some serious concerns about the older teens and whether or not they have some rights of free speech themselves. We don't really see the need for parents to come in and to take away their content, as it were.
Right. Thank you very much. Ms. Engel, there's been some questions about the response period and the notification and that people are not informed. What methods and techniques do you use to solicit responses?
Are you referring to comments on our proposal?
Yes.
We've published it in the Federal Register, issued, of course, as we all must with all proposed rulemakings. We issued a press release. We have reached out extensively. We have an extensive email list to privacy advocates and people who have expressed interest in privacy, in COPPA over the years. We're doing a lot of speaking. In fact, one of my colleagues is up in New York this morning speaking to the Children's Advertising Review Unit conference on our proposal in COPPA.
And the reason I raise this issue is that many members of the faith-based community are saying, look, nobody talked to us. We were not aware of this. When did it happen? In fact, they even blame me in many instances, and that's my problem.
Well, I know we've done outreach to faith-based institutions in other areas, for example, fraud protection, and I think we can look into doing that here as well. Right,
because these faith-based institutions have what they refer to as national conferences, and if you some way could arrange to get on their agenda, I think it would be a great service to all of us, because I think that they have some input there, and I think that we should solicit it. Yes, Mr. Reed.
I just wanted to add to that. I thought you really hit a key point, and Congressman Butterfield, the app that I was talking about from your district, the author of that app has raised concerns. This was the first she heard about it when I contacted her through a group of developers. And she said, well, this app allows grandparents to contact kids. Do I need to get parental explicit consent? How do I go about the process? And so this entire process to her, while there are rules and regulations, the publishing of something in the Federal Register, having discussions with privacy advocates is not necessarily the same as reaching out to the faith-based communities. And in specific, the app in your district is exactly the kind of app that Congressman Ed Towns is talking about. And I'm hoping that we can work with her to make sure she understands the changes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you.
I think the gentleman chair recognizes Mr. Harper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I certainly want to thank everyone for being here. And as a parent now of a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old, and we've dealt with those issues, and we had AOL, and we used age-appropriate email settings as they were growing up. I think there's a large responsibility for the parents themselves to make sure that they're monitoring this, and we certainly want to have those tools available. And this is just a curiosity question, Ms. Engel, on violations that come to your attention that result in fines. Just a general breakdown of the percentage that come from your own search or investigation or policing, those that might come from third-party organizations, and those that perhaps are reported by parents. Can you give me just a general breakdown?
I would say probably most of the violations we detect are from our own review. We do also get complaints, and things are brought to our attention by the COPPA Safe Harbor programs. They are a frequent source of complaints.
Okay. If I could just ask this sort of as a, we've heard a lot of different testimony here, but just at its most basic level, what is wrong with advertising to children based on those likes or dislikes, so long as the child is anonymous?
So we think that the same privacy interests that inspired Congress to enact COPPA in the first place, the idea that, at least with respect to children under the age of 13, young children, that parents are the ones who should be in the position of making the decision of permitting their children or not to interact with the website. And it goes both ways, both in terms of the website collecting personal information from the child and also being able to contact a child individually. And what we're seeing now, and what's behind our proposal, is that with things like tracking cookies, which are able to track children across websites over time, and direct ads based on their web browsing activity, that's a form of contact of an individual that falls within COPPA.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reed, I'd like to ask you a few questions, if I may, and certainly I know your position, a statement on a Supreme Court decision earlier this summer Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association 7-2 Supreme Court decision that dealt with the sale of video games to minors. Is there anything about that case that correlates to this that you've seen?
Well, I think we have to step back and think to ourselves, what are the goals what are we trying to do? What's the goals we're trying to achieve? I have an obvious bias. My goal is to make sure that we have mobile apps developers able to create jobs and specific applications that reach the right audience. And so when you look at both the Supreme Court decision and where we are heading both on this panel, I think it's pretty clear that our industry is to borrow a phrase that was used earlier, putting the pedal to the metal and trying to get things into the hands of as many people as possible. Therefore, we are going to be enthusiastic and supportive of ways that allow people to have access to our technology. That said, just like with video games, we are very sensitive to the content question. There's a big difference between, as we've discussed, and it's an interesting part about this whole privacy regime. In interviewing parents prior to this hearing and in other cases, when you ask them, what do you think when you see that only 13 and over in this location? The vast majority actually think it's about content, not about privacy. So I think that we've merged a lot of these privacy questions with content questions in a way that I think we need to pull back from. So when it comes to violent video games, when it comes to the Supreme Court decision, we need to maybe separate a little bit out on how we view the collection of information, the content of information, and who the audience of those are.
And I know I'm almost out of time. I want to end with one last question, Mr. Reed, if I can.
Yeah.
You had expressed some concern about the FTC's proposal to disallow the Email Plus system, and I'd like for you to just speak for the next 23 seconds on
I'll
that.
make it really short. We're concerned that the FTC's Email Plus complete abandonment is a bit of a Hail Mary. It's, well, we'll get rid of this technology and magically new technology will develop. Now, that might happen. But I think we're probably better off, given just exactly how nascent the mobile apps industry is and how we are quite literally learning every day, that I think we probably, if we're going to do anything, it should be consider sunsetted or given a longer time to stretch it out a little bit. Because I'm not sure in the mobile space people are exactly ready to just magically create new technology out of next week. Remember, most of these companies are small, and they don't have staffs of technologists ready to develop their own version of verifiable parental consent. So there needs to be some industry percolating, and I believe there are other incentives that can be used rather than just tossing it all out at once.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Mr. Guthrie, also the home of Oinkosaurus, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I have to figure out where Oinkosaurus is, so I have to
send you a link.
Send the link. That'll be great. Thanks a lot. To Mr. Nagam, is that Nagam?
Yes.
Okay. You in your testimony you said that we're focusing on we don't need to be focusing on things that sound bad and focus on things that are bad. What's the difference what's the examples of things that sound bad that we get focused on that distracts us from?
I mean, I'll go back more into the historical internet safety world. There was a time when anytime somebody went online, there was this fear that predators were going to attack them, and that sounded bad. And then once that happened, there was tons of proposals on do A, B, C, D, E, and E to stop that. But every time research was done, what ended up happening was research was showing around less than 1% or even less than that, there were actual issues with that as opposed to issues with things like digital fingerprints that kids are leaving online when they're going places, and 10 years later it's going to be haunting them when they're applying to college. That is bad versus what sounded bad. So those are the kinds of things that I'm referring to when talking about that.
And you mentioned that it would be against a business model to abuse the information, or because obviously people would quit going to that business if that's the issue. But the FTC does find violations of it, even though it would be a bad business model to do it. People are doing it or have done it, because you do from the FTC you do find violations of COPPA, I think. So I mean, how do you explain that?
Well, I think that's a great question, because if you look in the last 11 years, there's been 17 actions, which to me is amazingly small. And what you're finding, if you go through each of the 17 actions, for the majority of them, what you're going to find is companies who are unaware, didn't have the resources, didn't have counsel advising them, hadn't done the review when the developer was creating this great idea, and most of the time didn't even know they were doing what they were found to be doing, which I think is very different than saying there's a company who made an executive decision, we know there's COPPA, let's see if we can get away with it, and we'll make $10 million by the time they figure it out, and we'll be disappearing after that.
So there's no kind of cases of that like you see in Medicare fraud or stuff like that?
I haven't read every line of every one, but I
know of no case that does that?
If there is, I'm not aware of it.
Is that the typical violator would be someone who you find are small businesses that just, boy, I didn't know I was supposed to do that kind of thing?
No, not actually. Many of our cases are against very large companies, Sony, BMG, Universal Music Group, Iconics. But what we have found in those cases is they attempted to comply with COPPA, but didn't really follow through. So they may have, at the registration page, asked for someone to enter their date of birth, and they intended that if a person entered an age under 13, they'd be kicked off. In fact, they weren't. And then those kids were able to post information, et cetera.
Okay. And
if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
And having worked inside the companies with developers, what you often find happening is legal counsel in the large companies will say, here's the requirements. Developers don't always understand that, and there's where the disconnect occurs. So when something is executed, you create a new product, a new feature, it may be one of those left behinds or the right process wasn't in place, which is very different than an intentional violation or attempt to collect information from children that you know will violate their privacy rights or violate COPPA for that matter.
Yeah, Professor?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that having observed this all from the very beginning, if we hadn't instituted COPPA, you would see a very different marketplace. It's not a question of the business model not working. It wouldn't work now because it's not legal to work in that way, but it was heading in a direction that would have been absolutely outrageous, and we'd all be very, very upset at what we saw because data collection was built into the heart of it. And that is also what's happening with teens and adults as well. So that's why I think we need safeguards for everybody.
Thanks.
Right, and I do agree with what was just said in the sense that the expectations have been established and it has had a tremendous impact on the marketplace and the way it exists today. And so when I'm focusing on what do we do next, that's when we have to look at each individual proposal and say, is it proposing to solve a problem that sounds bad or is bad? Is there gaps? Are there things that can be done? And are there going to be unintended consequences? For example, shutting off Email Plus is a great example of that. Companies have been doing Email Plus with millions of users for, say, 11 years or 10 years, and all of a sudden that function disappears. What do you do with that millions of users on your site? How do you recreate that process? Are they grandfathered in? Those are the questions that have to be asked in that category of, is there technical implementation concerns? Will there be unintended consequences? And I think that's why I wanted to focus more today on providing a framework within which to look at it, as opposed to let's go line by line right now in this 2 hours that we have and come up with the answers.
Thank you. Well, I yell back. My time's expired. I yell back.
Thank the gentleman, and now recognize Mr. Olson for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair, and I want to welcome the witnesses and thank you for coming here today and giving us your time and your expertise. And my first question is for you, Director Engel. And you stated in your written testimony that the Commission is not aware of any operator directing online behavioral advertising to children. However, the Commission is proposing adding to the list of what constitutes quote-unquote personal information persistent identifiers. For example, numbers held in cookies, user IDs, IP addresses, as well as screen and usernames. And you state in your testimony that the effect of these additions would be, this is a quote, to require parental notification and consent prior to the collection and use of persistent identifiers for purposes such as behaviorally targeting advertising to children, unquote. My question for you, ma'am, is if the Commission isn't aware of any online companies directing behavioral ads to kids, then why does the FTC feel so strongly about wanting to change the COPPA rules to address this issue?
Yeah, our testimony is that no individual company has admitted that they're behaviorally targeting children under the age of 13. But there have been widespread reports in the press. For example, Dr. Montgomery referred to the Wall Street Journal article earlier that reported dozens and dozens of tracking cookies placed on child-directed sites. So it appears that, and the industry position has been that self-regulation is sufficient here to address the problem or the issue. But our thought is that, what the self-regulatory principle says that their members will not behaviorally advertise to children under the 13 except in compliance with COPPA. And so that's actually doesn't say much, because if COPPA doesn't cover it, then they're free to do it. But the outward statement appears to be that they won't do it. So we want to kind of close that gap and require parental permission before that occurs.
Okay, Mr. Simpson, do you have any? It seems like you had some comments. You want to follow up on that at all, sir?
I would echo those remarks and say that we are seeing signs of what's increasing. We saw it in the Wall Street Journal story. We see it in the increase in ID theft, and we see it as a basic business principle of some of these companies. Dr. Montgomery talked about the pattern of advertising toward kids before COPPA was established. We also need to keep an eye on what the pattern of valuation of companies in Silicon Valley is right now, and that is eyeballs. Do they have people on their sites? None of these companies, I would suggest, want to turn anyone away, and so their opportunity to reach out to kids of any age is valuable to them. I respect what some of my colleagues have said about the importance of corporate responsibility here, but I think they are caught in a tension, and they do want the biggest audience they can get, whether that's an individual app or a large website. So we see lots of signs of how much they are marketing toward kids and targeting kids under 13 and over.
Yes, okay. One more question for you, Director Engel. For the 5 new proposed rule changes to the COPPA rule being put forth by the FTC, has the Commission conducted any kind of economic impact analysis on these proposals, and if not, will you?
We've certainly considered the costs as well as the benefits that we hope to achieve by the rule changes, and we've in our Federal Register notice we have estimated costs on small businesses, and we're specifically seeking comment on our estimates, and if we're off on our estimates and inaccurate, and we certainly would like to hear from businesses about that.
And Mr. Reed, you have representing the app world, so to speak. And I want to say, by the way, while I was sitting here, I texted my 14-year-old daughter and told her I was with the app guy, and she basically said, "Dad, can I get a job with him in the future?" So,
we're hiring.
Thank you. Do you agree with that assessment? Are you guys being, the small businesses that you represent, being involved in the process?
I've found the FTC to be, towards me, as a trade association based in Washington, D.C., very responsive. I think that they lack the manpower and resources to really reach out to a community that is now over 100,000 developers in the larger picture and tens of thousands of developers in the educational app space. So I think that I respectfully say that we will be filing comments with the NPRM specifically about the small business impact, and we look forward to working with the FTC to make sure their estimates are appropriate. And I think that as we think about all of this, we have to remember 2008 was when we had our first app store. So we've had all of these changes in business models, in technology, in capabilities in 24 months. So we're looking forward to working with the FTC, and I think I'm probably going to say that we are going to estimate their cost up and encourage them to take a very measured approach on the impact to small business.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to make a comment on eyeballs. I because of the company that we have in terms of consulting with online businesses, we spend countless hours talking about COPPA and whether to choose even going under 13 and over 13. And the eyeball question comes up, and the uniform reaction is eyeballs that are good we want, eyeballs that are going to hurt us, kill our reputation, therefore kill our business. And I think that's something we should keep in mind, because that goes back to companies being incentivized to find the right way to do the right thing. Now, the challenge may be, what is that right thing, because we can't understand what it means. That's a very different question than whether you're motivated to even try.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm over time. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair recognizes Dr. Cassidy for 5 minutes.
I got a 10-year-old, and she'll take my iPhone, go to my iTunes, and she'll download Angry Birds. Dad, can I get Angry Birds? I never recall being asked if I'm over 13. I assume iTunes knows that I'm over 13. But as I listen to you guys, I'm certainly realizing, man, how do you empower a parent? That sounds so nice as rhetoric. But as a guy with a 10-year-old who's always on my iPhone, I have no clue how I'm empowered. I'm feeling very unempowered. So
I can help you with that.
Somebody empower me, buddy.
Yeah, I within most of the devices, and I'm happy. I can grab a cup of coffee, and I'm happy to walk you through. All of the devices now, some of them are better, some of them are worse, have pretty granular and pretty incredible parental restrictions that you can set up. On your iPhone, there's a page that you can go to where you can say your daughter can't download. You can set it up with its own password. You can
Now, okay, so my daughter downloads, my son who's 17,
right,
vim and vigor, full of himself, downloads something, but my 13-year-old uses it. Or
right.
if I go to my desktop, my 84-year-old mother who moves in with us is on the computer, my wife is, and then my daughter. So the super committee is placed for my mother, the super cookie is, but it tracks all the way through 3 generations. Now, it seems like, unless somebody is logging off, which we don't do, we leave it booted, that whether it's a cop or not, it's going to be tracking who's ever on that computer, correct?
That's correct. I'd, of course, recommend that you get more mobile devices for your household. That's the clear solution here.
We're going that way.
Get more.
Yes.
But yes, you're right.
Oftentimes I talk about how people distinguish between the online and the offline. But when you actually step back and say, as a parent, how would I handle this situation if it was in the physical world? I think those same kinds of conversations need to apply, which means a conversation, and I have an 11-year-old, of you're not allowed to do this, but your 16-year-old brother is. That's part one. Part two.
That assumes, the thing about a television, you walk by, you see the program, you have a sense of the content over a 30-minute show. You can have an entree into an online, and then that entree takes you someplace far different. So the parent downloads, it looks pretty benign, and next thing I know, I've got $10 on my credit card bill. Now, I figured out how to stop that, but that said, I just say it takes you in places. Ms. Montgomery, I liked your testimony, so let me get your contact. I think you were going to say something?
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to say is I think what we need are tools that will help parents because it's baffling for all of us, and I agree with you. It's very frustrating, and you can't really control where your kids are all the time. And that's why COPPA was designed to really address the business practices and really to minimize data collection. It was not set up to facilitate parental verification so that companies could collect a lot of data. It was really developed to ensure that websites targeting children did not collect a lot of data.
But again, if my mother is on, who's 84, and something is placed which begins to track and does not log out, and my daughter gets on, something benign at the outset, but perhaps more less benign further in, I mean, my mother has set the table for my daughter to be tracked, correct?
Well, right. That's right. Yeah. And that's why, this is an evolving marketplace, and there will be more and more of that happening, as others have noted.
I just wanted to make a quick point that all of the major cell phone operators now offer pretty good parental controls. And in our survey that we just released a couple of weeks ago, we found that 25% of American families now do use that. Now, that seems like a fairly low figure, but then if you compare it to the V-chip usage, which is around 15, 16%, that's not too bad. So I would highly recommend that you also use the...
Yeah, I have a parental control, but I'm sure I'm not using it to the full robustness as it should be.
And education. We need to empower...
Now, I will tell you, when I look at your documentation, and it says click here, for once I actually read it, and it was 40 pages of legalese, and a lot of it was redundant. A lot of it was actually repeated. And it's like I'm thinking they're trying to defeat me from reading it. Now we laugh, but when it is when it is repeated, and some of it is totally extraneous, it makes me think that which actually I might object to is buried deep within.
I feel your pain. That's all I can say.
Now I'll tell you though, but we got to move beyond feeling pain to actually having something where a parent can look at and say it's one paragraph, boom, this works and this does not.
Right.
Because right now I'm thinking, heck, I can't read through this.
There's another factor as well, sir, that you should consider, especially with apps, is that what drives those parental controls in many cases is the rating that was provided for the content in television and movies that's provided by an industry.
Can I ask one more question before we run out of time? Ms. Montgomery, I read in Wall Street Journal that if they put If they have this interactive game and they make the tractor red, white, and blue on a patriotic holiday, people are more likely to purchase something online. It begins to, you realize that there's a subliminal suggestion taking place, which is modifying the behavior of the person who's actually looking at the screen. Now, if that is true for an adult, it is absolutely true for my 9 and 10-year-old. How are we going to regulate this sort of subliminal molding of the person who is looking at the interactive game to manipulate them into a behavior which they frankly may not be aware they're being manipulated?
Well, that is the reason with, and I mean, these are major concerns, and I agree with you, and we haven't even talked about things like neuromarketing, which is one of the trends in the industry as well, in the online industry. But this is exactly why I think we need to ensure that COPPA makes it impossible for companies to behaviorally target, to track an individual child, and to create marketing that is designed for that child based on that child's behavior, psychological profiles, and other information that's been collected from that child.
Okay. That seems like nice sounding recommendations, but how do we get there? I'm not quite sure I know that.
We have to keep working at it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Kinzinger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me make sure this thing works. I may be the last person to ask you a question, so congratulations, you made it. Thank you for coming.
Excuse me, Mr. We plan a second round, so don't let them off.
Oh, yeah, stay. Okay, this round. But I really appreciate you coming in and talking to us. This is very important. And I think as we, here in Congress debate things like the economy and jobs and what's the proper role of government, does government micromanage an economic recovery, or is it the private sector, which I believe? This is a great opportunity to show how this area is an explosive market and really a bright spot in the American economy. It would be really sad to think of where we would be, frankly, without, technology innovation right now as an economy. What place would we have in the world? So I think as we go forward, it's very important that we understand that there's got to be a proper balance, of course, between where the government is involved and what it does, and also stamping down on the innovation of the free market. Because, again, if we're going to get out of this recession, and we are, it's going to be through that free market. So it's good to hear also from the witnesses that the FTC is working well with the stakeholders and updating our privacy rules to reflect that evolving world. As you've heard from everybody here, I'm amazed at what the young folks are able to teach me about what to do with applications and stuff like that. Even though I may be one of the younger members of Congress, all I can do on my iPod right now, or iPad, is surf the internet. I really don't know how to do much else. So I can go to my nieces and nephews to help me out with that if they need to. But I also want to say, to me, it's incredibly hard for parents to control or even know what their children are doing. And at the same time, I feel confidence, obviously, that mothers and fathers want to have that assurance that they know what's going on and things like that. The FTC has played an important role in this regard and should continue to work with the various stakeholders to ensure children's personal information is not being collected online. More can always be done, and this committee must determine, and it will determine, whether the FTC has enough authority to keep up with online advances, at the same time finding that balance. My first question, though, is to Mr. Reed. As the apps become more enhanced in geolocation and social media interactions advance, and they do it at a record pace and an exponential pace, frankly, do parents have the tools to ensure that predators won't have access to their children's location? Because to me, I see that as potentially being a very terrible story in the future.
Right, that's becoming kind of a universal conundrum. How does my child share his information with his friends and not let people that we don't want to see it? We're working on technological solutions. We're working on allowing kids to kind of develop their own friends list, but that has its own shortfalls. Does my 13-year-old, mine's 5 3/4, so she's not there yet, but does she know who her friends really are? The problem is if we take a step back, we had the same problem with this device called the telephone. People could call each other and say, "This is where I am. I'll meet you behind the park or behind the baseball field." So it's really a struggle that we have on how do we take this location-based location information that we're provided in our mobile device and somehow segregate it in a way that's different than, say, my telephone, physical telephone in my house saying, I'll meet you behind the baseball field.
Right.
So we don't have the answers. We are trying to figure it out. But a big part of what we're doing is empowering parents to know what their kid's device does, and by alerting them very clearly, hey, this is going to share your location. Are you okay with it? And in the case of most of the mobile devices, you can turn that off completely. So in mine, my daughter can't actually hit any button that shares her geolocation. And so that's what we're going to have to do.
And that's good. And again, as we go, I mean, in 2 or 3 years, if you all are fortunate enough to come back here and talk, we're going to have a whole slew of new different questions because there's going to be so much that we can't even begin to imagine now. And again, that's what's beautiful about our innovating economy is that, that's the case. But let me ask Ms. Engel, how is the FTC approaching geolocation technologies as it relates to children? And specifically, do you believe parents are given enough information to know what an app is storing about a child and what information is being shared with other users?
The FTC believes that geolocation information is already covered as an item of personal information under COPPA because COPPA refers to physical location, including street name and city or state, and geolocation information is at least as precise as that and often more so. But what we have proposed is specifically adding geolocation as an element of personal information, just to make that crystal clear.
Well, thank you. And this, again, this appears to be a good example of where government and private sector seems to be working well together. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman and recognize myself for the next 5 minutes. And to Dr. Montgomery, I appreciate very much your thoughtfulness and your work on this over the years. Last week, I took a trip up to Silicon Valley and I visited a number of the big firms. It was very, thought-provoking, I think. But what really strikes me the most is how, over the years, the internet has been built on the backs of intellectual property. And early on, when you think about Napster and Kazaa and the peer-to-peer networking and how we've moved into other models that actually try to pay for intellectual property, do you think, behavioral advertising to me, I grapple a little bit with why it's bad when sometimes they're trying to monetize these new models that end up trying to pay for content. Anybody who's a writer in the audience, anybody who's ever been a part of any creative work, any longer your work is devalued because you can't get paid. And when something is out on the internet in digital form, a copy of a digital copy is a master copy is a master copy is a master copy. How do you see moving forward then in a world where we need to try to provide decent quality content for our children and still protect them from behavioral advertising? And you said if we hadn't had COPPA, and I don't disagree with you, but you said it would have been outrageous what we would be living under now. How do you find outrageous, and how do you see paying for quality content going forward as people are grappling with how to pay people who create, valuable content for our children?
Well, I will tell you that what I saw in the early days was leading to a business model where kids were being, marketers were talking about creating personal relationships between a product spokes character and a child, things that nobody would ever talk about now in terms of targeted micro-targeting and targeting individual children. And I think what we've been able to do with COPPA is allow and enable that industry to grow and flourish, but by creating some guardrails, some rules of the road, where we are not taking advantage of the youngest children, where, as I mentioned earlier, research shows they don't have the capacities, they don't have the cognitive capacities or the psychological developmental capacities to handle these kinds of very, very sophisticated behavioral targeting and marketing.
But there must be some positive behavioral targeting out there too, and this is what troubles me about these discussions we have in here with privacy, with security, is all of these issues have another side to the coin, where some people see benefit, others see risk, all of these. But wait, let me go. My point here is, what if we wanted to do an anti-bullying campaign? That's positive. Or what if we want to encourage our children to go to a great university like USC or something like that? And so there are ways to target them in a positive way as well, aren't there? That we're stifling. Yeah.
Absolutely. And from the beginning, what we've said, and I still agree with, we were never trying to eliminate marketing or advertising in this context. We think that's perfectly fine, and even identifying the IPs, understanding that an IP address is still now personal information, personally identifiable, that doesn't mean you can't provide contextual advertising to children. That's still very much possible. You can do all kinds of anti-bullying campaigns. They're happening online. None of this would restrict it. What I think is important, however, is that we create some safeguards for the kinds of data collection and profiling and highly targeted and potentially very manipulative advertising that is targeted at younger children.
And
now,
can you speak a little bit towards, again, monetizing the delivery of quality content? This is what it's all about at the end of the day.
It's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. And yes, of course you need to monetize the content, but you do that at a price. And if it's a price that is not fair to children, that takes advantage of them, then I think you look for ways to alter that business model.
Thank you very much, Dr. Montgomery. Mr. Simpson, yes?
Just quickly to add to that, I think as a big believer in those incredible educational opportunities of apps, of a lot of this digital media, how do we monetize that? As much as possible, we do that with the engagement and empowerment of parents. Make them part of the equation so that they know about the cyberbullying campaign that we want to promote and that they're engaged with their kids with talking about USC and other great institutions. Make them part of the equation.
Quick question, Vince, we're trying also to get enough time to Mr. Markey to be able, so he can be here. You like the eraser button. I don't understand how that's technologically feasible. I'm not opposed to the concept, but again, if it's a digital recording, if a song is out there, it's out there forever. If a photograph is out there, it's out there forever. How do you technologically think that an eraser button is possible when it's already out there in cyberspace and you can't even attribute necessarily who originated it?
You're very right on that part, and one of our first pieces of advice to parents is in our education materials for kids is to make them recognize that these things can be forever, and all the more reason why kids need to be very careful about what they post, what they share. But as the bill has drafted, to the degree that it's technologically feasible, the eraser button should address some of the opportunities for kids or teens, parents in the case of kids, to take down what they own. This also gets back to what I believe Congresswoman Blackburn has described as who owns the virtual you. So this is also an issue of intellectual property. This is an issue of property. When we start sharing things online, they do get much more complicated. They run into First Amendment issues and they run into shared ownership. But at what point do we have tools for parents and for teens where something that belonged to me, a picture I took of myself, still belongs to me and is something I can take down?
All right, thank you. I need to yield to Mr. Butterfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hingle, let me start with you. The statute contains a broad definition of personal information. It states simply that personal information means individually identifiable information about an individual collected online and then includes a non-exclusive list of identifiers. The FTC is also granted the authority to expand the definition to include any other identifier that the Commission determines permits the physical or online contacting of a specific individual. This is the authority that the FTC is relying on to bring the meaning of personal information into the COPPA rule in line with the technological changes that have happened since the rule first went into effect. Let me just ask you yes or no. Am I correct that you are not required by the statute to determine whether changing the definition of personal information will unreasonably impede technological innovation?
That's correct.
All right. Yes or no, am I correct that you are not required by the statute to determine whether changing the definition of personal information will adversely affect interstate commerce?
That's correct.
All right. Yes or no, am I correct that exercise of this authority does not require any finding other than that the identifier permits physical or online contacting?
That's what the statute says.
All right. Yes or no, am I correct that you get to use streamlined APA rulemaking and are not required to follow the more burdensome Magnuson-Moss rulemaking process to change the definition?
That's correct, although we always, see comment on burdens and costs and technological feasibility, but it's not statutorily required.
All right. Yes or no, is this the first time in the 11 years since the COPPA rule became effective that the Commission has proposed changes to the meaning of personal information using its statutory authority to modify the meaning of that term?
Yes.
All right. Those are my yes or no questions. What? All right, we need to use some more time. It seems to me that when the FTC is given the ability to modify the meaning of a key statutory term like personal information, and 2, is allowed to do so following a straightforward and streamlined process, it is shown it will not abuse the authority or act hastily. It will not run wild and creates chaos and unnecessary costs for businesses. I think our experience with COPPA shows the FTC can exercise this sort of authority carefully and deliberately. I hope that's a lesson all of us here can apply to the data security context as we look to move legislation in that area that is both effective and adaptable to changes in technology and expectations about what information should be protected. This has been a good hearing, Madam Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses, and I want to thank you for your patience. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and at this point I'll thank the panel very much for your answers to our questions. You've been very gracious with your time, and as I've said, that these issues, I think no more than any others, have a flip side to everything that we do, and the law of unintended consequences can be very, very frightening. And with that, I'm actually just stretching. You owe me. And I'm happy to recognize
Thank you.
Mr. Markey for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank you for allowing me as a non-member of this subcommittee to participate. Thank you so much. I am the House author of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which Congress passed and President Clinton signed into law in 1998. It is the communications constitution when it comes to protecting kids online, but we need to update it to take into account the explosive growth and innovation in the online ecosystem over the last 13 years. I commend the Federal Trade Commission for its thoughtful and comprehensive review and for its proposed changes to that rule, which reflect and reinforce many of the same safeguards contained in the Do Not Track Kids Act that I introduced this past May with Representative Joe Barton. As in our bill, the Commission appropriately notes that teens should be provided with clear information about how their personal data is used and also empowered to exercise control over these uses. As in our bill, the Commission also proposes to add children's location information under the category of personal data that require a parent's permission before it's collected or used. Given the potential for this sensitive data to be misused to endanger a child, the Commission's proposal in this area is a much-needed step. I commend the Commission for rejecting arguments that voluntary, self-regulatory efforts are the best way to address privacy concerns in connection with behavioral targeting of children online. Strong legal requirements, along with vigilant enforcement, are needed to protect children from tracking and targeting on the Internet. Children should be able to grow up in an electronic oasis that enables access to online education, communication, and entertainment opportunities in a safe environment. And I look forward to working with you, Madam Chair, and all the members of the committee so that we can strengthen privacy safeguards and ensure that kids and teens are protected when they go online, and that is why I introduced the Do Not Track Kids Act. Mr. Simpson, you mentioned in your testimony that teens still need privacy protection online because, as we know, COPPA covers users 12 and younger. I agree with you. And the Do Not Track Kids bill that Joe Barton and I introduced provides teens with safeguards specifically tailored for their age group without expanding the COPPA structure to adolescents. Can you expand on Common Sense's views on privacy protections for teens, please?
Thank you, sir. We think you're taking very much the right approach. There's a complicated issue here called child development, and we all know that not all 8-year-olds are the same. 8-year-olds are not the same as 14-year-olds, and 14-year-olds are not the same as 20-year-olds, and many 20-year-olds act like 12-year-olds. But the reality is that teens need something more than they have right now. The FTC's recommendations are very valuable for kids under 13, but there are a lot of 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds who are quite capable of making mistakes in this innovative space, and those mistakes can come back to haunt them. They need opportunities, and they need a lot more education, and they need a lot more information that's actionable. They need resources they can use that are designed for their age group, not for lawyers who are well-versed in privacy.
Thank you. Dr. Montgomery, do you agree that younger teens need a framework for them as well? Perhaps
yes,
not for the 12 and under, but something tailored for that group.
Yes, I do, and this is something I've felt very strongly about for a long time, since we were debating COPPA, where the issue of whether we ought to apply the COPPA protections to teens was very much part of the discussion at that time. And what I really believe is that we do need protections here. What we've seen is with COPPA, we have a framework where there's an industry that appreciates the concerns about children, but with teenagers, it's been no holds barred and no real sensitivity to their concerns. So,
can I ask, what is your response to the questions that are raised about the eraser button that Mr. Barton and I have included in our bill? What do you think about its functionality as a way for parents to be able to protect kids?
I don't really know how the eraser button will work, but I do believe, as my colleague Alan Simpson has said, that teenagers themselves should be able to have some control over the information they've placed online.
Do you agree, Mr. Simpson? What is your view in terms of the eraser button?
Absolutely, and we don't know exactly how they will work, but I think the key is here we've seen a lot of innovation on how to collect and not enough innovation on how to protect. And I think something like an eraser button is a tool that industry can design to empower teens in richer ways.
Okay, thank you. And I thank all of you for your participation in this very, very important discussion. It's only going to get more and more dangerous for kids if we don't put these safeguards in place. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. And again, I'd like to thank Ms. Engel and the entire staff at the FTC who's devoted time and thought to this effort. Job well done. And also to all of you, once again, thank you. I would like to say that this is a third in our series of online privacy hearings so far this year. I look forward to our continued discussions on how we can best balance the need to remain innovative with the need to protect all of our privacy, certainly our children's privacy. Next week we will take a close look at consumer attitudes and expectations, and we know that's going to be a very interesting hearing. I will remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask all witnesses to please respond promptly to any questions you might receive, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you again.